Maria Rodriguez had been at Firebase Delta for 8 months, and most soldiers still couldn't pronounce her last name correctly. At 28, the former police sniper instructor from Texas sat in the back row during briefings, ate her meals quickly, and rarely spoke unless directly addressed. Her small frame and soft voice often led people to mistake her for medical staff or logistics personnel. The Argentine Hill Country military base sat at 2,100 meters elevation, where the dry, cold climate and treacherous terrain made every mission a calculated risk. The hierarchy here mattered more than skill, and Maria had learned that lesson repeatedly. During weapons maintenance sessions, she'd quietly spot problems others missed: a misaligned scope here, a trigger mechanism issue there. She'd fix them silently, never taking credit. Other soldiers would joke that Rodriguez was like a ghost. You never saw her coming, never heard her leave. What they didn't know was that Maria had 347 confirmed long-range hits during her police service back home. Her record included stopping 3 separate hostage situations with single, precise shots. But military culture was different. Here, your reputation came from who vouched for you, not what you could do. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison ran Firebase Delta like most military units by the book, with little patience for deviation. He was a career officer who climbed ranks through connections rather than combat experience. Maria had quickly learned that questioning his decisions, even respectfully, was career suicide. Rodriguez, he'd called out during one weapons inspection, his voice carrying across the armory. If you're such a good shot, why are you still fixing other people's rifles instead of leading missions? Maria didn't react. She simply looked up from the scope she was adjusting and said, "I don't need them to know, sir. I just need the rifle ready when it matters." The other soldiers had chuckled, but Harrison's expression hardened. He didn't like being made to look foolish, even unintentionally. The warning signs had been there from her first week. Harrison assigned her to support roles exclusively, despite her qualifications. When she expressed interest in joining reconnaissance missions, he'd wave her off with dismissive comments about staying back to handle technical support. Maria's bunkmate, Jessica Palmer, was one of the few who'd noticed the pattern. "It's not fair," Jessica had whispered one evening as they cleaned their gear. "You've got more experience than half the guys going out on patrol." "Experience doesn't matter if no one wants to see it," Maria replied, meticulously cleaning her personal rifle, a weapon that had been her companion for 4 years. She knew its exact ballistic patterns, wind compensation needs, even how humidity affected its accuracy. "Why do you always clean that thing?" Jessica asked. "You're not even going on tomorrow's mission." Maria looked up briefly, her dark eyes reflecting the overhead lights. "Because when someone needs it, it has to work perfectly." The next morning brought news of a major reconnaissance mission. 8 soldiers would handle convoy interdiction in hostile territory. Maria was assigned to base support and equipment backup again. As the team prepared to leave at dawn, she made one quiet request to Harrison. "Sir, if radio contact is lost, please let me join the search team." He barely looked up from his maps. "Rodriguez, we need someone reliable here. That's your job." She nodded and stepped back, but privately, she made a different decision. That evening, Maria sat alone in the armory, running calculations in a worn notebook. Wind patterns, elevation adjustments, sightlines from every defensive position around the base. Her teammates thought she was obsessive. They didn't understand that preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Jessica found her there past midnight. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be rough with half the unit gone." Maria closed her notebook and looked toward the hills beyond the base perimeter. Something felt wrong about tomorrow's mission. The intelligence was too clean, the enemy positions too predictable. In her experience, When everything looked perfect, that's when everything went wrong. Have you ever been sidelined just because people couldn't see your quiet strength? She asked Jessica. Every day, Jessica replied. But someday, they'll have to notice. As Maria finally headed to her bunk, she made one final stop at the communications center. The radio operator, Sergeant Mike Torres, was monitoring overnight. Frequencies. Rodriguez, what are you doing here? Just checking equipment, she said, examining the backup radio gear. If something goes wrong tomorrow, we'll need everything working perfectly. Torres nodded absently, focused on his instruments. He didn't notice Maria quietly testing the portable units and memorizing their frequencies. He didn't see her take note of which equipment had the longest range or best signal clarity. In military operations, the difference between life and death often came down to details everyone else overlooked. Maria had built her career on being the person who noticed those details. As she finally lay down to sleep, her rifle case beside her bunk, Maria stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. If her teammates needed her tomorrow, rank and protocol wouldn't stop her from doing what was right. She'd spent 8 months proving she belonged here. Tomorrow, she might have to prove what happened when you underestimated the ghost in the back row. The base fell quiet except for the wind whistling through the mountain passes. In a few hours, everything would change, and Maria Rodriguez would discover that sometimes being overlooked was the greatest advantage of all. But tonight she was just another soldier trying to sleep before another day of being invisible. The morning briefing excluded Maria completely. She stood in the back of the room, officially present but practically invisible, as Lieutenant Colonel Harrison outlined. The convoy interdiction mission. 8 soldiers would handle what intelligence suggested was a routine supply line disruption. Staff Sergeant Kevin Matthews, the unit's primary sniper, dominated the tactical discussion. He'd been Harrison's golden boy since arriving 6 months ago, despite having only basic marksmanship training. His connections to command staff back home had fast-tracked his assignments to high-profile missions. The target convoy should be moving through Sector 7 around 1400 hours. Harrison explained, pointing to the map. Matthews, you'll take overwatch from the northern ridge. Simple harassment fire to disable vehicles. Maria studied the terrain from her position in the back. The northern ridge offered good sightlines but poor escape routes. If enemy reinforcements came from the east, Matthews would be trapped. She started to raise her hand, then caught Harrison's warning. Glance and lowered it. Rodriguez, Harrison announced without looking at her. You're assigned to rear guard communications. Stay here and monitor radio traffic. The dismissal stung, but Maria had learned not to show emotion. Instead, she focused on memorizing every detail of the mission plan, noting the gaps and vulnerabilities Harrison's team had missed. After the briefing, Matthews approached her with his characteristic smirk. Don't worry, Rodriguez. We'll bring you back a souvenir from the real war. Before she could respond, Jessica appeared beside her. Kevin, shouldn't someone with actual sniper experience be giving you advice? Matthews laughed. Police work isn't the same as military operations, Palmer. When you've got enemy soldiers shooting back, it takes different skills. Maria remained silent, but Jessica wasn't finished. 347 confirmed hits. Seems pretty experienced to me. Numbers on paper don't mean much out here, Matthews replied, shouldering his rifle case. Besides, Harrison knows who he can count on when things get serious. As the team prepared their equipment, Maria noticed several concerning details. Matthews hadn't properly zeroed his scope for the altitude difference. 2 soldiers were carrying ammunition that didn't match their weapons. The radio equipment they'd selected had limited range in mountainous terrain. She approached Corporal David Kim, the team's communications specialist. David, those radio units won't reach base if you're more than 8 miles out. Kim looked, Confused, Harrison said they'd be fine. The mountain interference will cut your signal by 60%, Maria explained quietly. Take the backup units as redundancy. Kim nodded gratefully, but Matthews overheard the conversation. Rodriguez, stop undermining mission planning. We know what we're doing. I'm just trying to help ensure everyone comes home, she replied evenly. Your job is to stay here and answer phones, Matthews shot back. Leave the real work to qualified soldiers. The insult hung in the air like gunsmoke. Several teammates looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Maria simply nodded and walked away, her face showing nothing of the anger burning inside her chest. An hour before departure, she found herself alone in the armory with her rifle case. Inside lay her personal weapon, a precision instrument she'd customized over years of service. Every component had been selected and adjusted for maximum accuracy. Under stress, Jessica found her there, cleaning the same rifle for the third time that morning. You're really not going, are you? Orders are orders, Maria replied, but her tone suggested otherwise. This is wrong, and you know it. Harrison's playing politics while putting people at risk. Maria set down her cleaning rod and looked directly at her friend. I once saw a police operation fail because command wouldn't listen to the officer who knew the terrain best. 3 hostages died because pride mattered more than expertise. And I swore I'd never let that happen again. If I could prevent it. Jessica studied her face carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that rearguard communications might require a different interpretation than Harrison intended. Before Jessica could ask what that meant, Sergeant Torres appeared in the doorway. Rodriguez, Harrison wants to see you. In the command office, Harrison sat behind his desk reviewing mission files. He didn't look up when Maria entered. I want to be clear about your role today, Rodriguez. You monitor radio traffic, log communications, and stay at this base. You do not improvise, you do not freelance, and you do not leave your assigned position. Understood, sir? Good. Because if I hear you've done anything other than exactly what I've ordered, there will be consequences for your career here. Maria stood at attention, her expression neutral. Will that be all, sir? Harrison finally looked up, studying her face for signs of rebellion. Finding none, he waved her away. Dismissed. As she left his office, Maria felt the weight of 8 months of frustration and dismissal settling on her shoulders. She'd tried to work within the system, tried to prove herself through patience and competence. But the system wasn't interested in what she could do, only in maintaining its existing hierarchy. The departure came at dawn. Maria stood at her assigned position in the communication center, watching through the window as Matthews and his team loaded into vehicles. She'd done everything she could to help them within the constraints of her orders. Now she had a choice to make. As the convoy disappeared into the mountain passes, Maria began her own preparation. She checked weather conditions, calculated wind patterns, and studied terrain maps with the intensity of someone planning for war. Because sometimes, when the system fails, someone has to be ready to step outside it. Torres was busy with routine communications, paying no attention to her activities. He didn't notice when she quietly tested backup radio equipment, or when she memorized the mission's primary and alternate frequencies. 2 hours after the team's departure, she made her decision. If her teammates needed help today, rank and protocol wouldn't stop her from providing it. She'd spent too many months being underestimated to let that underestimation cost lives. The ghost in the back row was about to become something else entirely. The first sign of trouble came at 13:45 hours. The reconnaissance team's routine check-in was 15 minutes late. Maria monitored the primary frequency while Torres handled other communications, but the silence stretched longer than normal operational delays. By 1400 hours, when the team should have been engaging the enemy convoy, still no contact. Torres started looking worried. "This isn't right," he muttered, adjusting his equipment. "They should have reported enemy contact by now." Maria said nothing, but her hands moved steadily across her own equipment. She'd been monitoring 3 additional frequencies Torres didn't know about, including the enemy's suspected communication channels. What she'd heard in the last 30 minutes made her stomach tighten with dread. At 14:20 hours, Torres tried raising the team on emergency frequencies. Static responded to every call. He looked at Maria with growing alarm. There, completely dark. No response on any channel. Through the communication center's window, Maria could see the mountain pass where the mission was taking place. Smoke was rising from multiple locations. Too much smoke for a simple convoy interdiction. "I'm calling Harrison," Torres said, reaching for the command line. Before he could connect the call, Maria's blood went cold. Through her earpiece, she caught a fragment of enemy radio traffic in broken English. "American team eliminated. Moving to secure area." She ripped off her headset and grabbed Torres's arm. "Get everyone to defensive positions. Now." "What? Why?" The ground shook. A distant explosion echoed through the mountain valleys, followed by a second blast that rattled the windows of the communication center. Torres stared in horror as a column of black smoke rose from Sector 7. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. That's where they were supposed to be. Maria was already moving, grabbing emergency radio equipment and her rifle case. "Call base command. Tell them we have a reconnaissance team down and possible enemy advance on our position." "Where are you going?" "To do my job." She was out the door before Torres could stop her, running toward the abandoned bunker complex on the base's eastern perimeter. The position offered sightlines toward Sector 7 and multiple defensive angles if enemy forces approached the base. Her mind raced through tactical calculations as she moved. If the reconnaissance team had been ambushed, enemy forces would likely advance on Firebase Delta to prevent survivors from calling for reinforcements. The base's defensive positions were designed for typical guerrilla attacks, not coordinated assault, but there was something else. The smoke pattern she'd seen suggested multiple vehicle fires spread across a wide area. That wasn't consistent with a simple ambush. Something more complex had happened. Maria reached the bunker and immediately began setting up her position. The abandoned complex offered connected chambers with different sightlines, perfect for creating the illusion of multiple defenders if necessary. Through her scope, she could see the disaster site 3 miles away. Vehicle wreckage scattered across the mountain road, some still burning. No movement visible from her position, but the scene was clearly devastated. Then she saw them. Enemy vehicles moving in formation toward the base. 6 trucks carrying what appeared to be at least 30 soldiers. They weren't retreating after their ambush. They were advancing to finish the job. Maria keyed her portable radio. "Base command, this is Rodriguez. I have visual on enemy convoy approaching from Sector 7. 6 vehicles. Approximately 30 personnel. ETA 12 minutes. Harrison's voice crackled back, tight with stress. "Rodriguez, what's your position?" "You're supposed to be in communications." "Sir, the reconnaissance team appears to be down. Enemy forces are advancing on the base. Request permission to engage from Overwatch position. Negative. Return to base immediately." "That's a direct order." Maria watched the enemy convoy navigate the mountain road with practiced efficiency. These weren't guerrilla fighters, this was a coordinated military operation. In 12 minutes, they'd be in position to assault Firebase Delta. She made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. "Sir, radio contact is breaking up. I can't hear your transmission clearly." "Rodriguez, do not engage. Return to base now." Maria turned off her radio. Through her scope, she studied the enemy formation. The lead vehicle contained what appeared to be the command team. 2 transport trucks carried the main assault force. 3 support vehicles brought up the rear, probably carrying ammunition and communications equipment. If she was going to stop this attack, she had one advantage. They didn't know she was here. The enemy commander would expect defensive fire from the main base, not from an abandoned bunker complex a mile away. But she was one person with limited ammunition facing 30 enemy soldiers. Traditional tactics wouldn't work. She needed to think like the police sniper instructor she'd been, not the overlooked support soldier she'd become. In hostage situations, the key wasn't always shooting, it was psychological warfare, making the enemy think they faced a larger force than actually existed. Maria began moving through the bunker complex, identifying different firing positions. Each chamber offered a unique angle on the approaching road. By moving between positions and timing her shots carefully, she could create the illusion of multiple snipers coordinating their fire. The enemy convoy was 8 minutes out. She chambered her first round and settled into position. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. This was what she'd trained for her entire career, the moment when everything depended on precision under impossible pressure. Through her scope, she could see the lead vehicle's commander studying the base through binoculars. He was confident, methodical, planning his assault with the certainty of someone who believed all opposition had been eliminated. He was about to learn otherwise. Maria centered her crosshairs on the lead vehicle's front tire and began her final calculations. Wind speed, elevation, target movement, all the variables that separated successful shots from missed opportunities. In 6 minutes, she would fire the first shot of the most important engagement of her life. The ghost in the back row was about to announce her presence. Maria's first shot came at exactly 14:55 hours, striking the front tire of the lead enemy vehicle just as it rounded the final bend before Firebase Delta. The truck lurched sideways but remained operational, exactly what she'd intended. Through her scope, she watched the enemy commander immediately order defensive positions. His soldiers scattered with military precision, taking cover behind rocks and vehicles. They were well-trained, disciplined, and now extremely cautious. Good. Caution would make them predictable. The commander was shouting orders, gesturing toward different positions around the road. Maria could read his tactical thinking, assume multiple snipers, establish perimeter defense, locate and eliminate threats before advancing. She waited exactly 10 minutes before changing positions and firing again. Shot 2. The command vehicles. Engine block. Steam poured from under the hood as the truck died. Now the enemy couldn't coordinate their advance effectively, and their commander was stranded with his assault force. The psychological effect was immediate. Enemy soldiers began firing randomly at shadows, wasting ammunition on empty positions. While Maria remained perfectly still in her new location, they were seeing snipers everywhere because they expected to see snipers everywhere. Between the second and third shots, Maria made a crucial discovery. Through her scope, she spotted movement in the rubble of the reconnaissance mission site. 3 figures in American uniforms were hiding behind concrete debris, apparently wounded but alive. Her teammates had survived the initial ambush, but the enemy hadn't found them yet, and they would. The longer this engagement lasted, the more likely enemy forces would expand their search pattern and discover the survivors. Maria adjusted her strategy. Instead of trying to drive off the enemy force, she needed to keep them focused entirely on her position while rescue teams could reach her wounded teammates. Shot 3. Ammunition truck radiator. No explosion, but the vehicle was immobilized, and the enemy now faced the possibility of running out of supplies during a prolonged engagement. The enemy commander was getting frustrated. Maria could see him arguing with his subordinates through her scope. Some wanted to charge her position. Others wanted to call for air support. But they couldn't do either. They didn't know exactly where she was, and their communications equipment was in the disabled command vehicle. More importantly, they still believed they were facing multiple snipers. Maria moved to her fourth position, a chamber with sightlines to the rear of the enemy formation. Through the bunker's connected passages, she could appear to be shooting from completely different angles while never exposing herself to counterfire. Shot 4. Communications vehicle engine. Now the enemy was truly isolated, unable to call for reinforcements or coordinate with other units in the area. The Maria was running into problems of her own. Blood loss from shrapnel wounds suffered during the initial blast was making her vision blur. Her left side ached where she'd been thrown against the bunker wall. Worse, she was down to her last 7 rounds. Through her scope, she could see the enemy commander making his final decision. He was ordering his soldiers to advance on foot, leaving the disabled vehicles behind. Nearly 30 trained fighters would soon be moving across open ground toward her position. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. With the enemy out of their armored vehicles and exposed during movement, she could protect her teammates more effectively. But she was also about to face overwhelming odds with limited ammunition. Maria settled into her 5th firing position and began the most crucial engagement of her career. Every shot had to count now. Every decision could mean the difference between saving her teammates and losing everything. The enemy soldiers began their advance in professional formation fire teams, providing mutual support, using terrain for concealment, moving with the confidence of superior numbers. They were about to discover that numbers meant nothing if you couldn't locate your target. Maria had spent her entire career being underestimated because of her size, her quiet manner, and her unwillingness to promote herself. Today, those same qualities would become her greatest weapons. The advancing soldiers were looking for a sniper position. They weren't prepared for a tactical ghost who could appear anywhere and disappear before they could respond. Shot 5. The last operational vehicle, stranding the entire enemy unit. Now the real battle would begin. Through her scope, Maria could see her wounded teammates still hiding in the distant rubble. One appeared to be bleeding badly. Time was running out for everyone. But she'd accomplished something crucial. The enemy force was now completely focused on finding and eliminating her. Every soldier, every weapon, every tactical decision was directed toward the bunker complex, which meant rescue teams could reach the survivors without interference. Maria had become exactly what she'd always been. In the military, invisible when it mattered most. The difference was that now her invisibility was saving lives instead of being overlooked. She chambered her 6th round and prepared for the final phase of the engagement. 7 rounds left, 30 enemy soldiers advancing, 3 wounded teammates depending on her. The mathematics were clear. Impossible odds that could only be overcome by perfect shooting and tactical brilliance. Maria Rodriguez had spent 8 months proving she belonged in this unit. Now she had 7 bullets to prove what happened when you finally gave her the chance to show what she could do. Maria's psychological warfare was working better than she'd hoped. Through her scope, she watched enemy soldiers advance cautiously across open ground, constantly scanning for multiple sniper positions that didn't exist. Their fear of coordinated fire was keeping them slow and predictable. But 30 soldiers, even cautious ones, would eventually reach her position. She needed help to arrive before that happened. The sound of helicopters in the distance gave her hope. Base Command had finally grasped the severity of the situation and was sending rescue teams. But the helicopters were still several minutes away, and the enemy advance was accelerating. Maria moved to her 6th firing position and made a tactical decision that would either save everyone or get them all killed. Instead of shooting to disable more enemy soldiers, she began shooting to hurt them. Shot 6. A rock formation 20. feet to the left of the advancing squad. The bullet sparked off stone with a distinctive ricochet sound, making the enemy soldiers dive for cover and shift their formation away from that direction. Shot 7. Another near miss, this time driving the enemy squad toward a narrow depression in the terrain that would force them into single file. The enemy commander was experienced enough to recognize what was happening, but his soldiers were already committed to the new path. Maria was using precision shooting to control their movement like a chess master controlling pieces on a board. But she was down to her last 9 rounds, and the enemy was getting closer. Through her scope, she could see the rescue helicopters approaching the original ambush site where her wounded teammates were hidden. The enemy commander saw them too and began shouting orders. Several soldiers started to break off from the main advance to investigate the helicopter landing. This was the moment Maria had been working toward. With the enemy force split between advancing on her position and responding to the rescue operation, she finally had manageable odds. But she needed to keep both groups focused on immediate threats rather than coordinated tactics. Maria moved to her most exposed firing position, a chamber with clear sight lines but limited cover. If the enemy located her here, she'd be trapped. But this position also offered her the best angles to protect both the rescue operation and buy time for reinforcements. Shot 8. Enemy soldier advancing toward the helicopter landing zone. Not a killing shot, but a shoulder wound that dropped him and forced his teammates to provide medical assistance instead of continuing their advance. The psychological impact was devastating. The enemy soldiers now realized they were facing a sniper capable of precision shots at extreme range under combat conditions. Their confidence shattered, and their formation became defensive rather than offensive. But Maria had made a critical error. Her muzzle flash from the exposed position had given away her location. Enemy fire began hitting the bunker walls around her position. Concrete chips sprayed across the chamber as rifle rounds shattered against reinforced walls. She was trapped in position with only 7 rounds remaining. Through the chaos, she could hear radio chatter from the rescue helicopters. American forces had reached her wounded teammates and were providing medical assistance. The first objective of her engagement was accomplished. Now she had to survive long enough to ensure the rescue teams could evacuate safely. Maria analyzed a tactical situation with the cold precision that had made her legendary in police service. 7 rounds. Approximately 20 enemy soldiers still capable of fighting. Multiple firing positions compromised. Rescue operation ongoing but vulnerable to enemy fire. The solution required perfect timing and absolute accuracy. She began moving through the bunker complex again, but this time her movement pattern was different. Instead of randomly changing positions, she was implementing a specific tactical sequence designed to create maximum confusion in minimum time. Position A. Shot 9. Targeting an enemy soldier, providing covering fire for an advance team. The shot forced the advance team to halt and take defensive positions. Immediate movement to position B. Shot 10. Targeting equipment rather than personnel. An enemy radio pack exploded, eliminating their ability to coordinate with other units that might be in the area. Rapid movement to position C. Shot 11. Another equipment target. The enemy's remaining heavy weapons were now disabled. The bunker complex echoed with gunfire as enemy soldiers shot at positions Maria had already vacated. Their muzzle flashes revealed their locations, while her movement through underground passages kept her invisible. But she was down to 5 rounds, and the enemy commander was adapting to her tactics. Instead of trying to locate her exact position, he was ordering his soldiers to suppress the entire bunker complex with concentrated fire. The strategy was working. Maria found herself pinned down as hundreds of rounds shattered against concrete walls and ricocheted through the chambers. She couldn't move between positions without exposing herself to devastating crossfire. Through a gap in the concrete, she could see the rescue helicopters preparing to evacuate with her wounded teammates. The operation was nearly complete, but the enemy fire was intensifying. If they managed to damage the helicopters or force them to abort the rescue, everything she'd accomplished would be meaningless. Maria made her final tactical decision. Instead of trying to eliminate the remaining enemy soldiers, she would create a diversion so dramatic that every enemy fighter would focus exclusively on her position until the rescue was complete. She had 5 rounds left to convince 30 enemy soldiers that they were facing an entire sniper team instead of one wounded woman with limited ammunition. The success of the most audacious bluff in military history depended on perfect shooting and absolutely flawless timing. Maria chambered round 12 and prepared to attempt something that would either save everyone or guarantee her own death in the process. The ghost in the back row was about to make the loudest noise of her entire career. Maria's plan required split-second timing and theatrical precision. She positioned herself at the chamber center, where she could rapidly access 3 different firing ports. The enemy soldiers had concentrated their fire on the main entrance, believing she was trapped in a single position. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Shot 12, fired from the eastern port, targeting an enemy soldier's equipment pack. The explosion of ammunition created chaos and forced half the enemy force to take cover facing that direction. Without pausing, Maria sprinted to the western port. Shot 30, a carefully placed round that ricocheted off metal debris, creating sparks and noise that suggested multiple shooters coordinating their fire. Immediate movement to the northern port. Shot 14, another ricochet shot designed to sound like it came from a completely different weapon system. The effect was exactly what she'd hoped for. Enemy soldiers were now firing in 3 different directions, convinced they were surrounded by a coordinated sniper team. Their formation collapsed as squads moved to counter threats that existed only in their imagination. But Maria's deception came with a terrible cost. Moving rapidly between firing positions while wounded had reopened her injuries. Blood was flowing more freely now, and her vision was starting to blur from blood loss. She had 2 rounds left. Through her scope, she could see the rescue helicopters lifting off with her wounded teammates safely aboard. The first helicopter was already disappearing toward Firebase Delta. The second helicopter was gaining altitude, carrying the most seriously injured soldier. Mission accomplished. Her teammates were safe, but the enemy commander had figured out her deception. Through her scope, she could see him reorganizing his remaining soldiers into a coordinated assault on the bunker complex. Nearly 20 fighters were preparing to storm her position from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria settled into her final firing position and accepted the inevitable. She couldn't escape the bunker complex without exposing herself to overwhelming firepower. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted. Blood loss was affecting her shooting accuracy. But she'd accomplished something extraordinary. 3 American soldiers were alive because she'd held this position. The enemy force that had planned to assault Firebase Delta was reduced to scattered. Demoralized fighters focused entirely on one bunker instead of their original objective. She'd spent 8 months being invisible. Now she was the most visible target on the battlefield. Shot 15. The enemy commander himself. Not a killing shot, but a wound serious enough to eliminate his leadership and throw the remaining assault into confusion. 1 round left. The enemy soldiers began their final assault, rushing the bunker from 4 different directions. Maria could hear their footsteps on concrete, their shouted commands echoing through the chambers. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached her position. Maria Rodriguez thought about her 8 months at Firebase Delta, the dismissive comments, the missed opportunities, the constant struggle to prove herself worthy of basic respect. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's condescending attitude and Staff Sergeant Matthews's cruel jokes. Then she thought about the 3 soldiers now safely en route to medical treatment because she'd refused to follow orders and stay in her assigned position. The approaching footsteps were getting closer. Maria chambered her final round and made peace with her decision. She'd broken military protocol, defied direct orders, and conducted an unauthorized engagement against overwhelming odds. She'd also saved 3 lives and prevented an enemy assault on Firebase Delta. If that wasn't worth a military career, she didn't want the career anyway. The first enemy soldier appeared in the chamber entrance, rifle raised and ready to fire. Through her scope, Maria could see his face clearly young, frightened, probably barely out of training himself. She had 1 shot left and perfect accuracy despite her wounds. But as her finger touched the trigger, the sound of American helicopters filled the air. Gunship support was arriving, called in by the rescue teams who'd witnessed her impossible stand against overwhelming odds. The enemy soldier heard the helicopters too. His confident advance turned into panicked retreat as he realized American reinforcements were about to turn the tide of battle. Within minutes, the remaining enemy fighters were either surrendering or fleeing into the mountains. The assault on Firebase Delta was over, defeated by 1 woman with a rifle and the tactical genius to use psychology as effectively as ammunition. Maria lowered her weapon and finally allowed herself to feel the pain of her injuries. Blood was pooling beneath her position and her vision was fading rapidly. But through the bunker's cracked walls, she could hear American voices calling her name. Medics were approaching, guided by the rescue teams who'd witnessed her incredible defense. She'd held the position until reinforcements arrived, just like she'd promised herself she would. As consciousness faded, Maria Rodriguez realized she'd finally proven something important, not just to the military hierarchy that had dismissed her, but to herself. Sometimes the ghost in the back row was exactly the person everyone needed most. Maria woke up in the Firebase Delta medical facility 3 days later, her left side wrapped in bandages and her rifle case sitting beside her cot. The first face she saw belonged to Jessica Palmer, who'd been maintaining a bedside vigil since the rescue teams brought her in. "How are you feeling?" Jessica asked, relief evident in her voice. "Like I got thrown against a concrete wall," Maria replied, trying to sit up and immediately regretting the movement. "That's because you did, along with single-handedly fighting off an entire enemy assault force." The full story was already spreading through Firebase Delta. Maria had held an impossible position for over 2 hours, creating the tactical illusion of multiple snipers while protecting wounded teammates and preventing an enemy assault on the base. The enemy commander, captured during the final helicopter assault, had revealed under interrogation that his unit believed they'd been fighting at least 12 different snipers positioned throughout the mountain pass. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison appeared in the medical facility doorway, looking uncomfortable and avoiding direct eye contact. Behind him stood a man Maria didn't recognize older, with colonel's insignia and the bearing of someone accustomed to command respect. "Rodriguez," Harrison began awkwardly. "This is Colonel William Drake from Division Command. He's here to discuss your actions during the engagement." Colonel Drake stepped forward with an expression Maria couldn't read. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you disobeyed direct orders, left your assigned position, and conducted an unauthorized engagement against enemy forces." Maria's heart sank. Despite everything she'd accomplished, the military hierarchy was going to punish her for not following protocol. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly. "You also saved 3 American lives, prevented an assault on this base, and demonstrated tactical innovation under impossible circumstances," Drake continued. "Your former commanding officer from police service, Captain James Wilson, spoke very highly of your capabilities when I contacted him yesterday." Drake pulled up a chair beside Maria's cot. Captain Wilson told me about your hostage situation successes. He said you had an unusual ability to think 3 moves ahead of suspects, to predict their actions before they knew their own intentions. I just tried to understand their psychology, sir. According to the enemy commander we captured, you convinced his entire unit that they were facing a coordinated sniper team. 29 experienced fighters were completely outmaneuvered by one person with 16 rounds of ammunition. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. Sir, while Rodriguez's actions were effective, she did violate direct orders. Colonel Harrison, Drake interrupted, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. Your reconnaissance mission was compromised due to inadequate planning and poor tactical assessment. Rodriguez identified multiple problems with equipment and positioning before the mission launched. You ignored her input. The room fell silent. Maria had never seen Harrison look so small. Drake continued. Staff Sergeant Matthews, your primary sniper, made basic errors in equipment selection and tactical positioning. His scope wasn't properly zeroed for altitude. His ammunition selection was inappropriate for the terrain, and his overwatch position offered no escape routes. Sir, Matthews has excellent credentials. Matthews has connections, not competence, Drake said bluntly. Rodriguez has 347 confirmed hits in actual combat situations. When did you plan to utilize that experience? Harrison had no answer. Drake turned back to Maria. The investigation into this incident revealed several disturbing patterns. You've been systematically excluded from missions despite superior qualifications. Your tactical recommendations have been ignored. Your expertise has been dismissed because of personality conflicts rather than professional assessment. Maria found her voice. Sir, I just wanted to do my job effectively, which is exactly what you did, despite being ordered not to. Drake stood and faced Harrison directly. Colonel, you're being reassigned to administrative duties pending a full review of your command decisions. This base needs leadership that recognizes talent regardless of personal bias. The impact of Drake's words hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Harrison's career was effectively over, and Maria's vindication was complete. But Drake wasn't finished. Rodriguez, your actions during this engagement demonstrated tactical innovation that deserves wider recognition. I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Staff Sergeant and assignment as head sniper instructor for the entire Mountain Division. Maria stared at him in shock. Sir, I don't understand. Your ability to outthink enemy commanders, to use psychology as effectively as marksmanship, represents exactly the kind of tactical evolution we need in modern warfare. I want you training other snipers in your methods. Jessica squeezed Maria's hand excitedly, but Maria herself felt overwhelmed. After 8 months of being invisible, the sudden recognition felt surreal. There's something else, Drake added. The 3 soldiers you saved, Corporals Anderson, Thompson, and Williams. They've requested to serve under your command when you're cleared for active duty. Anderson said, and I quote, Rodriguez risked everything to keep us alive when no one else even knew we existed. The emotional weight of that statement brought tears to Maria's eyes. She'd spent so long being overlooked that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly valued. Drake pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Your tactical analysis of this engagement has been forwarded to the Pentagon. They're particularly interested in your deception techniques, how you convinced the superior force that they were facing multiple threats. I just used what I learned in police work, sir. Hostage takers often respond more to psychological pressure than physical force. Exactly. You adapted civilian tactical psychology to military engagement. That's innovative thinking we need to incorporate into standard training. Harrison, realizing his presence was no longer welcome, quietly left the medical facility. His departure felt like the closing of a chapter Maria had been trying to write for 8 months. Drake noticed her watching Harrison leave. Don't take satisfaction in someone else's failure, Rodriguez. Take satisfaction in your own success. I never wanted him to fail, sir. I just wanted the chance to succeed, which you've earned. Your new assignment comes with full tactical autonomy for training operations. You'll have the authority to design curriculum, select students, and implement whatever methods you believe are most effective. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. The woman who'd been excluded from mission briefings was now being asked to design training for an entire division. Sir, what about the other soldiers here? Some of them might have difficulty accepting orders from someone they've seen as support personnel. Drake smiled. Rodriguez, you just proved that one person with superior tactics and unwavering determination can defeat 30 enemy soldiers. I don't think you will have trouble earning respect. As Drake prepared to leave, he paused at the door. One final thing. Your actions saved more than 3 individual lives. Intelligence suggests that enemy assault on this base was intended to capture American prisoners for propaganda purposes. You prevented an international incident. After Drake left, Maria lay back against her pillow, trying to process everything that had happened. In 3 days, she'd gone from being the invisible soldier in the back row to becoming the most recognized tactical specialist in the Mountain Division. Jessica sat down beside her cot. How does it feel to finally get the recognition you deserve? Maria thought about the question carefully. Strange. I spent so long trying to prove I belonged that I forgot to think about what I'd do if people actually started listening. And now? Now I get to make sure other people don't have to fight as hard as I did to get their chance. Outside the medical facility, Maria could hear the sounds of normal base operations resuming. But she knew that nothing would ever be quite the same at Firebase Delta. The ghost in the back row had finally found her voice, and everyone was going to hear what she had to say. 6 weeks later, Maria stood in front of her first class of sniper trainees at the newly established Mountain Division Tactical Training Center. 24 soldiers from various units had been selected for her advanced course, including several who had previously dismissed her expertise. Staff Sergeant Kevin Matthews sat in the front row, his expression carefully neutral. His demotion following the failed reconnaissance mission had been swift and decisive. Now he was a student in the program run by the woman he'd once mocked. Before we discuss marksmanship fundamentals, Maria began, we need to understand something more important: tactical psychology. Before you aim at a target, you need to understand why that target chose to be there. She moved to the large terrain map mounted on the classroom wall. A sniper who only knows how to shoot is just an expensive rifle. A sniper who thinks 3 moves ahead can change the entire battle. The students took notes carefully. Word of Maria's impossible stand against overwhelming odds had spread throughout the military community. These soldiers were here to learn from someone who'd proven herself under the most extreme circumstances possible. Can anyone tell me why psychological warfare might be more effective than superior firepower? Maria asked. A young corporal raised her hand. Because it makes the enemy defeat themselves? Exactly. During my engagement 6 weeks ago, I fired 16 rounds and convinced 29 enemy soldiers that they were facing a coordinated sniper team. They spent more ammunition shooting at shadows than I used in the entire battle. Matthew shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The details of his tactical failures during the reconnaissance mission had become a case study in what not to do. Maria continued, every shot you don't take is as important as every shot you do. Patience and positioning matter more than rapid fire and aggressive advancement. After the morning lecture, she found Matthews waiting outside the classroom. His approach was hesitant, almost apologetic, a stark contrast to his previous arrogance. Staff Sergeant, could I speak with you privately? Maria nodded toward her office. Inside, Matthew stood awkwardly while she settled. Behind her desk. "I owe you an apology," he began. "I was wrong about your qualifications, wrong about your experience, and wrong to treat you the way I did. Kevin, we've all made mistakes. What matters is learning from them. I could have gotten people killed with my arrogance. You saved lives. Despite my stupidity." He paused, struggling with words. "I want to learn from you, but I understand if you prefer I transfer to a different program." Maria studied his face. The cocky bravado was gone, replaced by genuine humility and a desire to improve. This was the kind of transformation that made teaching worthwhile. "Stay in the program," she said finally. "But understand that here, your previous rank and connections mean nothing. You'll be evaluated solely on your tactical thinking and marksmanship. Accuracy. That's all I want, a fair chance to prove I can do better." After Matthews left, Maria walked to the window overlooking the training range. Students were practicing long-distance shooting under the supervision of her assistant instructors. The program was already showing remarkable results accuracy. Rates had improved 30% in just 6 weeks. Jessica appeared in her doorway, carrying a folder of administrative reports. "The Pentagon wants to expand your program to 3 additional bases. They're calling it the Rodriguez Method." "That's a terrible name," Maria replied, but she was smiling. "How about advanced tactical psychology for military snipers?" "Better, much better." Jessica sat down across from Maria's desk. "I have to ask, do you ever miss the old days? Being invisible, not having all this responsibility?" Maria considered the question. Sometimes. There was a simplicity to being overlooked. No expectations, no pressure to perform, no one watching your every decision. But 3 soldiers are alive today because I refused to stay invisible when it mattered most. If that's the price of recognition, I'll pay it gladly. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Corporal Anderson entered, still walking with a slight limp from injuries sustained during the reconnaissance mission ambush. "Staff Sergeant, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. The doctors say Thompson's going to make a full recovery, and Williams is already back on active duty." "You don't need to thank me, Anderson. We look out for each other. That's what soldiers do." "Maybe, but not every soldier would have disobeyed direct orders to save people they barely knew." After Anderson left, Maria returned to her window. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the training range where her students continued practicing the techniques she'd developed through years of experience and one impossible battle. Her personal rifle case sat in the corner of her office, the same weapon that had enabled her legendary stand against overwhelming odds. But it wasn't the rifle that had made the difference. It was the tactical thinking, the psychological warfare, and the absolute refusal to abandon teammates in need. Colonel Drake appeared unexpectedly in her doorway. "Rodriguez, I have news. The Joint Chiefs want to incorporate your training methods into the curriculum at military academies nationwide. You'd be responsible for developing the entire program." "Sir, that's an incredible opportunity, but I'd have to leave Firebase Delta." "Not necessarily. They're offering to build a permanent training facility here with you as the commanding officer. Full colonel rank upon completion of the program development." Maria stared at him in amazement. 8 months ago, she'd been fixing other people's rifles and sitting in the back row during briefings. Now she was being offered command of a national training program. "Take your time deciding," Drake said. "But remember, you've proven that one person with the right training and mindset can accomplish impossible things. Imagine what you could achieve with the resources to train thousands of soldiers in those same methods." After Drake left, Maria walked onto the training range where her students were concluding their afternoon exercises. They looked at her with respect earned through demonstrated competence rather than granted through rank or connections. Matthews approached with his target sheets from the day's shooting exercise. His accuracy had improved dramatically in just 6 weeks of proper instruction. "Staff Sergeant, I wanted you to know I've learned more about tactical thinking in your program than in my previous 4 years of military service." "That's because you're finally listening instead of assuming you already know everything," Maria replied. As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The months of being dismissed and overlooked had been painful, but they'd also taught her patience, humility, and the value of proving worth through actions rather than words. She thought about the message she always wrote on the classroom blackboard after every training session. "You don't need to shoot often. You just need to shoot when nobody else can." But now she understood there was more to that philosophy. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with rifles at all. They were fought with determination, intelligence, and the absolute refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose. The ghost in the back row had found her voice, and now she was teaching others to find theirs. As Maria locked up her office for the evening, she made her decision about the Pentagon's offer. She would accept the position and build the training program they wanted, because somewhere, in some future battle, a soldier trained in her methods might face impossible odds and need to know that one person with the right mindset could accomplish anything. She'd spent 8 months learning that lesson herself. Now it was time to teach it to others. The transformation was complete. Maria Rodriguez had become exactly what the military needed, not just an exceptional sniper, but a leader who understood that true strength came from recognizing and developing the potential in others. She'd proven that heroes weren't always the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes they were the quiet ones in the back, waiting for the moment when everything depended on their precision, their courage, and their refusal to let others down. The ghost had become a legend, and legends, Maria had learned, had the power to inspire others to achieve the impossible. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.